Independent Electoral Boundaries Commission Bill. This is a bill of the National Assembly that was first published there. Perhaps because, to the best of my recollection, Mr. Speaker, this is the first time I'm moving a National Assembly bill before this House. And so to the benefit of the new members, some of whom may be asking why we are moving a National Assembly bill in the Senate, is that this is purely about nomenclature. That if a bill is named after the originating House, if a bill begins its legislative journey in the Senate, even when it's read in the National Assembly, it will be referred to as a Senate Bill number XYZ. So, Mr. Speaker, on 1st of December, the National Assembly passed this bill without any amendments. And thereafter, the bill was referred to us for consideration. And that is why we are here today. The principal objects of the bill, Mr. Speaker, is to amend the IEBC Act in its first schedule, which provides for membership of the selection panel for purposes of appointment of chairman or members of the IEBC. Mr. Speaker, sir, the proposed amendments to the Act were necessitated by the declaration by the High Court through Constitution Petition number E36 of 2020 by now Senator Okia Omtata, then just as a ordinary citizen, versus the AG. And I'll be making a particular comment about our colleague senator. There are things that I wish to better understand, especially in the unique situation that we find ourselves in, now being our colleague, and there are things that we discuss here. Perhaps you may need to guide us later, but I'll speak about it later. I wish he was in the House when I was saying this, Mr. Speaker, and I hope so. So the bill seeks to cure the above cited malady as proscribed by the High Court in its ruling, reducing the number of membership of the PSC, that is the Parliamentary Service Commission, from 4 to 2, and to allow the Political Parties Liaison Committee and the Public Service Commission to each nominate one member to the panel. So, Mr. Speaker, specifically, the bill proposes that the following new paragraphs, that's 1, 2, on the composition of the panel be as follows. That is one man and one woman. I love that. It's a new way, actually, of drafting our legislation, Mr. Speaker. We are becoming more descriptive. If you have followed the journey of legislations in Parliament, Mr. Speaker, on many occasions we just used to say 2 members. But now it's increasingly becoming a culture where if you have 2, you specify and say at least a man and a woman. I expected that my good friend Beth will be stamping her feet and all the women in the House, because that's good progress for the women folk of this country, Mr. Speaker. So 2 nominated by PSC, specified, has to be a man and a woman. Then 1 nominated by Public Service Commission, 1 nominated by Political Parties Liaison Committee, 1 nominated by the LSK, Law Society of Kenya, and 2 persons nominated by Interreligious Council. You know, Mr. Speaker, over time, and I say this because I know you are an interested party and maybe the leader of minority and a few other lawyers in the House, but we will soon be discussing about LSK. Almost every legislation that we pass in this House, we keep on proposing, oh, LSK needs to have people. What about architects in this country? What about engineers, Mr. Speaker? What about doctors? What about border riders, you know, especially us that profess the bottom-up economic approach. So this business of allocating almost every position in any commission that we pass here to LSK, I believe it is time that we reconsider it, Mr. Speaker. Even our auditors and the rest, Mr. Speaker, needs to be considered. Of course, I know lawyers will protest, Mr. Speaker, but we'll have that conversation. I urge the honorable senators to consider and pass this important bill to ensure that the IBC selection panel is constitutionally constituted, allow them to effectively perform their mandate. Mr. Speaker, you know, this is a very interesting scenario. I know the journey of this bill very well. I was in this parliament when we passed it, Mr. Speaker, and I also happened to have served in PSC at that particular time when we did the selection panel. There were very interesting intrigues back then. When we retreated, and I made these revelations a few days ago, I think 2 days ago at State House, when we were celebrating the exit of the chairman of IBC, Wafula Chebukati. And Mr. Speaker, I made the observation that the law as then prescribed in my thinking, and I still hold that particular view, that 4 members nominated by PSC is not arrogating ourselves as Parliament too much powers, because Parliament is a reflection of the entire country. Everybody knows that Parliament has two sides, the minority and the majority. And even then, as we sat in PSC, we wrote letters to leadership of both houses, the majority side and the minority side, and asked them to each nominate 2 members to the selection panel. The only unfortunate thing, Mr. Speaker, is that at that time, because of the handshake politics that existed, the majority and the minority were one side. Therefore, it ended that one side of the political divide ended up nominating actually all the members of a selection panel. And that gave birth to the infamous, what are now being referred to as OPEC 4. It's a history that we wouldn't wish to go back to, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, for people to go to court and say that if Parliament gives itself that kind of powers, we are actually emasculating out the rest of reflection of society, I do not agree with that ruling. And it's unfortunate. If it was not for the unique situation that we find ourselves in, Mr. Speaker, where the chairperson has now left office and 2 commissioners, and therefore we need to set up a selection panel to bring into place a constitutional commission, because, Mr. Speaker, you understand the urgency. If today, for whatever reason, there was to be a by-election, and you know there are many petitions in court, or even in the unfortunate event that for whatever reason a vacancy arose in any of the House, despite the constitutional provision that we have to do an election, IBC must carry an election within 90 days. There is no commission to run that particular. Therefore, this business is extremely important, Mr. Speaker. But I go back to my point on Parliament being the nominating body. This is a political process, Mr. Speaker. What I expected, perhaps our colleague, and it's unfortunate, as I've said, Senator Mtata is not here, to have argued, is how the composition of that 4 members of the selection panel is arrived at, so that you have the shade of the country. Because when Parliament is gathered like this, every form of political opinion in this country is reflected. And therefore, it is erroneous to argue that out of 7, if you give Parliament the power to nominate 4, you have actually rewarded Parliament. You know, Senator Okiya Mtata presents us with a unique situation, Mr. Speaker. Now he sits in JLAC. And I wanted to say this when he's here, but unfortunately, he is not here with us. As a member, say, of Justice and Legal Affairs or whatever committee of Senate, he will sit with us. But you may need to guide us, Mr. Speaker, if, after listening to arguments, say, about a particular bill, the pros and cons, you know, members, before they conclude on or make a decision on a particular bill, Mr. Speaker, they take their time to listen to arguments from both sides of, or whatever people are presenting before us, and make a decision in the best interest of the country. If somebody was to sit in that committee, sit here, we vote together, the decision of Parliament or Senate, even as a House, carries the day. Then they move to court and use information, or what will then be referred to as evidence, that they acquired through the lawmaking process. Mr. Speaker, that presents us with a very unique constitutional equation that you may want to guide us and give a ruling on. Whether it is possible for a member to participate in our proceedings, then once you conclude, you go back and injunct the same House that you participated in. I don't think we've ever found ourselves in this situation, but it's something that I wouldn't wish to delay us. Therefore,